hi, I'm Dan. I'd just stand up on the stage. I'd get up on the stage and I'd say, hi, everybody. I'm Dan. I'm doing this right now. You want to hear a little bit more about it? Let's go. Take them on a little adventure into the world of esoteric and weird cryptography. My favorite.
Good. I like it. So tell us 3 things that everyone needs to know about Web3.
3 things that everybody needs to know about Web3 in our day and age. Okay, so the first thing is self-sovereignty. All right, so you have control over your keys. It's very important. It's a differentiating factor between Web 2 and Web 3 is that you own your accounts. Okay, so it's not like having an account with somebody else. It's like owning your own account. So you have full control over it. That's number 1, I'd say. Well, what comes in at number 2? Okay, so I suppose then once you're, in control and you've taken responsibility. Number 2, after you've taken control of your keys and you're sovereign individual, you need to think about what networks you're going to be using. Okay, so many Web3 networks, it's like having many internets. And one important aspect of the chains that you participate in is how decentralized they are and how distributed they are. So there's no one central controller, right? So you can look at it and you go, well, where are all these transactions coming from? Who's validating these transactions? But essentially, what you're looking for is something that's resilient in the face of attack, right? So if you've got one network and it's only running one very, very centralized validator, like hub, and that hub gets attacked, the whole network goes down. So we see that all the time, outages and downtime and things like that. So it's got to be sufficiently decentralized and distributed. So it's 2, sovereignty and decentralization. Oh, now 3. Tough one. I guess we're just going to take it to the next level, right? So once you've got those 2 things, that's fine. But then there's a really, really big problem about moving forward in this space right now. Really early, and this is how early we are, is that all of the transactions on public ledgers are public. And varying degrees of information you can draw from that. The majority of chains are pseudonymous. So it's not linked with your real identity, but you can dox yourself, or somebody can dox you. So they know your on-chain activity, they can link that to your real identity, and suddenly everybody's got a view of your bank account. And that's a really big problem in my head. I looked at it and I thought, well, fine, blockchains, sounds amazing. And sort of 5-6 years ago, it was a very small group of people who were looking at this and thinking, this is actually a really big problem. We really need to solve this. If we're now moving into this world where you've got sovereignty and you can use things that are sufficiently decentralized that aren't controlled by one party or one government or one company, well, the next layer on top of that is then to make sure that activities on that are in some way hidden from the rest of the participants. And that's number 3. So sort of privacy layer. You think about that in Web3. Or at least thinking about how your pseudonymous representation can't be linked back to your real identity. And that's a mindfuck. It's a real mindfuck. And you can figure out who people are. And you can figure out somebody's net worth. So if you come up against them in an auction, so you're going to buy a car, or you're going to go buy a piece of art, you're going to go to an auction house. Imagine walking into an auction house now, like one where you pay cash or one where you have like a broker that does it for you. But everybody has like a sign above their head that says, this is the depth of my wallet. This is how much I can afford to spend on this art. You might have some idea, but in Web3, in distributed ledgers, open, you have this list. As soon as we start playing the game, and you can see how much I've got in mine. And that's not really a very effective way to run open market economies. You need these things, privacy. And we got too deep there, it's pretty deep. But anyways, 3 things. Sovereignty, decentralization, and privacy. I think it's pretty good. So that's the sort of security side of things. But then when you move up into the contract layer, you start playing the games and interacting with contracts on various chains. They also have their own security vulnerabilities. So contract security is sort of another layer. But it's probably the world's most adversarial environment for software, right? Because it's all open. So that's actually really good for security and privacy. I don't really like to lump those two things together. But for security, the best thing you can have is a completely open landscape where anybody can attack anybody else, right? Because you find vulnerabilities almost immediately. If you have something that's not safe, you can get it out there on a test net, or even just go live and have bounties. But because it's open, because it's completely permissionless, anybody can look, anybody can test it, anybody can fork it, so make a copy themselves and run tests over it. And I think in that environment, things are only getting stronger, right? It's worse in Web 2, where you have these closed companies, and they have closed software that nobody can really see how it functions. It's a very black box, it's all hidden. Well, then that company is responsible for the security of that information. And that's great, but there's no way that a centralized body is going to have the same kind of hive mind as open source. And that's another core kind of tenet of Web3, is very much driven by open source technology. Right? So nothing's hidden behind a paywall. Most, not all of the code should be inspectable, and so that you can verify that it does what it says on the tin. The reason why people trust Bitcoin and the protocol, the consensus layer, so why transactions are included in a block and it says I've got less Bitcoin and you've got more Bitcoin when I give you some, is because the code is open and inspectable. It's not like a bank where their systems are hidden. You might be able to sort of reverse engineer what they might be using, what, IBAN and SWIFT and international payment systems that they're using. That's all cool, but essentially the execution of that code is their problem, and we can't see it. So in open source, that's very different. When you talk about security, yes, it appears in Web3 that we go through these cycles of exploits and hacks and things happening very, very fast, and it continually happening, but that's because it's public, right? It's happening because these things happen all the time inside companies, but it's only a very small team that deals with it. They go, oh, we've got this thing, and nobody really knows. Whereas in Web3, because of the open source nature, you have many, many more eyes on it. And you just don't know where somebody could come up with a really great idea. You want to welcome the attack, right? If you're building a protocol, if you're building a business in Web3, you want people to be adversarial, right? You need this adversarial environment where the rubber meets the road, you can really test it up against. I don't think there's at the moment, I don't think there's a sort of area of technology or business to be in at the moment where so many smart people are working right now.
I wanted for you to speak a little bit about the community aspect of this whole new thing.
You find your tribe, right, wherever you go. And that if you want to build something, you can quite often find other people who want to build the same thing. Not because they want to make any money, they just want to use it for themselves. I think that's what you find mostly, is that inside Discord channels and Telegram groups, people are there for a whole different range of reasons, depending on the group in which you fall into. Call it live action role play, right? So every time you drop into a new Discord server or drop into a new Telegram group, it's like an event going on. It's like a drama continually, and everybody's in there, and they're all live action role playing in this new imaginary journey that everybody in the same room is on, and they're trying to discuss about how and why we're all going in this direction, and that grows over time. Some people come early and then leave. Some people build things that are core, very, very key cornerstones to the tech, and then leave. And then new people will come and they'll build on top of that. But yeah, community comes from, I think, what are you trying to achieve, right, in this group? What's this token trying to achieve? What's this protocol trying to achieve? And I think that's the most exciting part, because once you put something out in the wild, anybody can use it. Anybody can change it in any which way. So they might think of things that you could take you 10 years to think of, and they could just do it in an afternoon. Right, so it's the power of this community aspect. I'm I prefer community over ecosystem. I'm not a big fan of that word or that phrase, partly because even in ecology, it's been rejected. It's not about balance. It's not about restoring balance to, the world. It's about chaos and explosions and innovation everywhere, right? So I think that happens in communities, right? So it's when you talk and you discuss things, the world changes. So you have a new idea. It doesn't matter whether it's over text, whether it can be synchronous at the same time or asynchronous. I can be friends, and I've been working with people for years who live in completely different time zones. And under the very rarest of circumstances do we ever actually speak live. Puts different value on your time, right? So it suddenly becomes, to get 5 people around a table from all over the world becomes a very, very costly endeavor. So it better be bloody worth it. Is it? And you have to ask yourself that question. So if you have a Web3 company and you've got a distributed team, yeah, might be worth it. Get everybody around a table, get everybody at a conference. In fact, take them all to all of the conferences, all of the time. Huge cost, massive expense. But if the thing you're building is important, and that those people around, you think you can make the progress synchronously over async, then it's definitely a consideration. And there are hackathons and events and conferences all over the world, and Web3 is just exploding with that now. Stuff happens every week, every weekend, all over the world, and people get together and hack things together, discuss projects. So you can do all of this from your bedroom. There's no reason to travel anywhere for work, really. You can just do it all from your bedroom. So what is it that's going to drive you to get up? So it's got to be worth it. So this is where you get to make these really hard decisions about what is really, really valuable information, who you really want to go and see, and who you really want to go and speak to. It becomes a very important consideration.
Where do you start?
Well, it depends on what your background is, right? So if you've got maths, engineering, a computer science background, then there's obvious routes for you there. You can get into software development, get into protocol development, and go to research. You use your technical abilities in all kinds of new projects. But what's coming up now, people joining from non-technical backgrounds, so people who work in marketing, people who work in the arts, people who work in comms. It's about colouring in, and you've got the lines, and the engineering's done, or is on the way. Somebody's drawing the lines. So the comms, the marketing, all of these, you call them non-technical, but now we live in a whole new world where, being technical, what does that even mean? Right? But storytelling and narrative and seeing things in a way that can be communicated clearly, cut straight to directly to the message, that's where new people are coming in. I think that's the biggest draw right now.
I will literally bend your ear off all day about Web3, even if you express the smallest amount of interest. I'll have your ear. Well, I think everybody should be getting into Web3 right now. I think they're already 6 years too late. No, they're not late. There's some maturity now. So we've got some bigger companies, some bigger groups. So if you wanted to join a bigger company with more infrastructure and a salary, that kind of thing, you can totally do that. But the majority of Web3 startups are just solo founders or 1 or 2 people that then want to grow their team. So usually it starts out with some sort of technical implementation, like a minimal viable product, and that'll be done by the technical team. They don't know quite what it should look like or how it should be communicated, so you need to get somebody in or think about the marketing, think about your message, what does this solve? And that needs more help, right? You need more and more people to get around that idea. But in startups, you end up doing almost everything. So everybody does everything all of the time. So you can be, even if you're not technical per se, traditionally, you will learn very quickly, about the technical aspects, even if it's just to sort of explain them, just to articulate them. That's a very, very useful skill right now. That's seriously lacking in Web3. You've got a lot of technical people, a lot of technical terms, cutting edge cryptography implementations. That's hard to get that across. And so people with skills, communication skills, copywriting skills, strategy, to be able to build a narrative around a product or a service or protocol is almost as in demand as user experience and front-end design.
Yeah, I think that's being in Web3 is like being in any startup, right? It's scrappy, you don't know where anything is going, it's chaos a lot of the time. But doesn't matter your background or your skill set, I mean, get involved, and you can join, teams of people who also don't know what they're doing. And some of it might work, most of it won't. Keep trying. How do I get paid? In magic internet money. Well, I guess if you're working on a token project or some kind of perpetual funding mechanism that either starts out fat or gets fat at the tail, and your participation at whatever stage you can agree on a distribution, how much you get out of the pot. So it's kind of like having stock in a company. But essentially it depends on when you join the project. If you think you can improve that design and negotiate with the team for some sort of compensation, whether it's 2-week short stint or 2 years, it's all in negotiation. But yeah, you can get paid in regular money if you want. Depends on who you work with. Experiments through the window. Experimental.
So, my questions.
Keep them coming.
Oh yeah. What is the place of AI in Web3, and what can you tell us about machine learning?
Okay. Hard question to answer. I mean, in terms of using the tools that we have now to build in Web3, you can 100% use AI to build everything that's come before now in a fraction of the time. So in terms of tooling, in terms of building and having an application, you can build applications way faster than you could before because you're using artificial intelligence tools. So there's Codex for code completion, and that's what Microsoft got inside Visual Code Studio now. So if you've got a code editor, you can add this Codex, the various others, and it helps you make the code, help you write the code, help you write your tests. But more generally, there is a threat from everything being on the open ledger, and now everybody has the tools, like artificial intelligence tools. To be able to dox somebody is getting much, much easier, right? Because you can run all kinds of really amazing data analysis without any particular background in data science. And you could take archival nodes, archival information from the blockchain, and then you could run that over various other data sets to try and identify people, specific people to specific addresses. And that's getting easier and easier every day. So that's why the third tenet, the privacy part, so sovereignty, decentralization, and then privacy is really like the emerging. It's becoming more prescient day by day, and that's why AI is a real threat. Is you can be almost instantaneously identified by your on-chain presence, which previously, up until now, been pseudonymous. So you've been able to use a pseudonym, a name that's not your regular name, but now with AI tools, that defense is wearing a little bit thin. So we need to start thinking about the next phase. What does it mean?
So have you got a team that you work with?
I've got a few teams I work with, yeah. But I'm very independent. And I contribute where I can to open source projects. And ultimately one day when I've got my own open source project, I hope other people will come and help me too.
Nice. That's good.
Well, so in something like social media, we've got a feed. The algorithm that they use to give you what you want
quite often it's closed source. So the company will handle that. And they won't show you what's going on behind the curtain. They'll simply give you the feed. And that's where you get scrolling. When you've got blockchain information, so financial information or assets that you control, and that information is now mixed with these algorithms, is that you can get a very, very highly detailed picture of somebody's mental state, their geographic location, their family setup, and you can use all of that information against them if you were malevolent and evil character. So that's why it's so important that we move quickly and work as hard as we can for privacy tools. So the curated feed, it'd be great to get a feed from a social network where the algorithm that fed you that feed was open, but nobody else saw your feed or could reverse engineer what you were seeing. It is possible, but we're at very, very early stages of that right now. So the sovereignty part, being able to sign and attest to say that you make this request, say, I want to see cat pictures, right? You can sign that request with your key, and that signature allows you or permits you in certain protocols and certain environments or certain algorithms, will give you all the information back about cats. Be great. But we don't want everybody knowing that we're looking at cats. No. We don't want to, because, we've got important cat business to be doing. We've got important cat trade secrets that we need to protect.
It's good.
It's a good one. So,
What's my way in?
What's your way in? Okay, so there's a part of crypto and Web3, it's a very well-known saying, it's called do your own research. Okay, so it's like part of this is like, I can talk to you about this, or like, for a while, people were qualifying their tweets with, this is not financial advice, or their accounts on Twitter would be like, not financial advice, in some way that would protect them. I mean, from, I don't know what. Anyway, people can make recommendations. You can hear things from people all over the crypto sphere. Crypto Twitter is probably the main. But anything you want to buy into, you should probably do your own research, right? So if you find something, it looks shiny, looks like something you could, you could work with, or you could do. Well, no, this is where it comes to the sort of community element that we talked about earlier on. It's like if you're in a room, in a Discord server or in a Telegram group, and you ask some questions and you get some answers back, and there's a conversation happening, and you can spin up any, people don't mind, questions being asked as long as they're sort of genuine, come from genuine interest, right? Everybody in Web3 loves to help everybody else. Usually projects have got links. So if you find a project on like Twitter or Medium or Ghost or any blogging platform that anybody's using to write about their stuff, normally they'll have links. So they'll have a link to a Discord channel where they have more in-depth conversations. They sort of subdivide it into more categories. I mean, the big foundations often have really useful resources. So the Ethereum Foundation has great sort of backlog of resources and articles, and they've got very current research that they're engaged with, and people have published papers recently. So if you want to dive in technically, you can go in that way. And most blockchains will have something in the image of that. Right? They'll have some foundation that will be sort of in charge of funding and development. The websites of the projects that you want to look at, they're great place to start. That's it now, I think. We're done. We're going to go get some lunch, I think, now. Walk in the sunshine.
So we're here. Well, we talked about what is Web3, touched on what that means for creatives and artists, but that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about today. Really, what's the call to action? Like, why would you come into Web3? Technology is great, and the Web2
services and products and things that we have are amazing, but if they let you down, there's really nobody to
help you.
Right?
You're on your own.
It's just in their hands.
Yeah.
So moving this into like Web3, what does that mean for data storage? We're particularly interested in something called metadata in Web3. So it's the data that you attach to other sources of information. In Web3, we can create unique digital assets, artworks, one-of-ones, and the metadata that's appended, stored with that unique digital asset has to be stored somewhere. And there are various protocols that we can use to help store that information, but make it immutable so that nobody's in control. So you're not reliant on something like iCloud or Google Drive or any of the third-party storage providers. We have another system which fits very much like your iCloud, but it's called IPFS. It's called the Interplanetary Filing System. It's become this cornerstone.
It's a cool name.
Really cool name, right?
I love it.
Yeah. Just a lot of really, really smart people have worked on this. So the creator of this guy called Juan Benet, he runs a company called Protocol Labs. They're enormous. They've focused right in on this decentralized immutable storage. And the first thing they created was something called IPFS, so this interplanetary filing system. That's grown into something else called Filecoin. So it's sort of more enterprise grade. It has token, so it has an economic model inside. It's a new way to run cloud storage peer-to-peer. So rather than you having one account with a cloud provider, we could come to an agreement where I'm your cloud provider by using these various systems. So you can use IPFS, which doesn't have a token economic model, but it's a utility. It's a very strong utility. Like, it uses something called content addressing. So all of the content that you provide when you store it on IPFS, it provides a unique identifier. And if that data changes in that content, that identifier changes as well. So you can guarantee by using the IPFS protocol that the metadata hasn't changed.
So what is metadata? I know what metadata on a file is.
Yeah. Okay.
Is it the same thing?
Yeah. So it's anything, I think, broadly, any data that's associated with any other data. So in terms of...
So it's info on the file.
Info on the files. So the traditional view, and the way that we've mostly heard about metadata in the past, is that when national security agencies say, we're not reading your messages, but actually what they're doing is they're collecting the information around that message or around that email. So like the sender, the time of day, number of messages that are exchanged between those parties.
So that's available
That's available to them, and that's what we call sort of metadata. This is sort of additional information that you can collect about data.
Yeah.
Now it's become very, very powerful. It's probably the most valuable source of, it's the new oil. Data is the new oil. And the metadata, the more metadata you can associate with any one piece of data, like the more that we can build up that picture using metadata. So the time, the place, the person, the IP address, the device that they're using, all of this is collected by big tech companies, including your storage provider, so your iCloud provider. And they use all of that information to build up a picture about you. But none of that is owned by you. Or, in fact, most people are pretty unaware that that information is being collected by these third parties. So they are providing you a service, so your cloud storage you might pay for, but they are also collecting this metadata, and it gives them a much broader, much more detailed picture of who you are, and then what they can trade that information for. So they'll sell that information on.
So what now in Web3?
Well, now this is where we turn metadata on its head. So now you become the creator. Now, the internet, the first wave of the internet, we had read-only. So you have a static web page where you visit the web page using the internet. So you can visit the internet. Visit the internet. So you can visit the internet.
Oh man, that's fine.
I guess I don't know. We're refining new terms here, so I guess
it's
visit
fine.
the internet. I think that's what they're trying to say with the metaverse, right? So how do you improve on let's visit the internet? You're like, let's go to the metaverse or something. I don't know. There's all these new terms, and it's all developing all the time. So I mean, what's wrong? Hang on, where the fuck was I?
That's fine. No, Web Web one.
Okay, yeah, here we go, yes.
Visit
Right.
the internet static.
Static page, right? So you can visit the internet, you can go to a web page, and you can read it.
Yeah.
You can't interact with it. You can just read the information from it. And then the next phase we had was read and write. So it's when the web page became the blog page.
Yeah.
So you could then,
Put your photo up.
yeah, or you can add information through that portal,
Yeah.
through that URL, and somebody would store it for you. So your service provider, you have a whole stack of tools behind
Yeah.
that allow read and write. Now the third wave of the internet is we go from being able to read information from a web page to be able to write information into a web page. So it's given us all of the services like Twitter and Facebook and social. So it gives you that two-way communication. So people who have accounts with Twitter are creators, so you're constantly interacting with that. So you're now being able to, you can write to that web page, so you can give it information and it'll store it or use it and present it in some way. Now the next phase in Web3 is when that information is owned by the creator. Protocol that we use varies amongst different blockchains, but essentially it's held, you sign the information with a private key. Nobody knows that private key, but if you sign it using that private key, you're declaring ownership of it. And because you have now associated that with a public key pairing and use that private key to sign that data when you store it, something like an NFT or any other digital asset that you would like to sell or exchange or use in some commerce, Web3 is the way that we own data. Right? So how, if you do create files that are valuable, let's say are going to be valuable, how do you protect that value once that information has been released? So if you want to sell it, if you would like to move it on, or if you'd like to move it and try and exchange it with somebody else, you're entirely free to do that. It reduces the sort of bureaucracy and the access point for many artists. Okay, so rather than having to have, a lawyer, an accountant, an agent, a manager, all of these rules, you can still have all of these roles in your artistic endeavor, especially if you're a musician, if you're in a band, or if you're in a group, or you're a company that wants to use this technology. You can wrap up an awful lot of the red tape and the infrastructure inside a contract so that everybody in that team can be working towards creating these digital assets for their team or for their company or for their band or part of their creative work.
Yeah.
But now there's no requirement for a third party. You can create digital assets, or we can create digital assets, and then we can sell them to other people. And there's no other need to use any other third party. So no storage, no cloud provider. We use other things.
Where is it all actually getting stored?
Where does it go?
Like, where does it go? Where is it?
Very good question.
All this Web3 stuff. I mean, we all know traditional servers in Web2.
Yeah.
What about Web3?
So your cloud storage.
I mean, it's very it's still physical. We live in a physical world. It's not like some.
There is no cloud, just somebody else's computer. Okay. So it's like they paint this picture of like, yeah, it just goes up into this. There. Don't worry. It's okay. Don't worry about it. We've got it. But essentially, it's just somebody else's computer.
Because basically, you are choosing providers to store your data and manage your data.
But
they're just smaller companies. They're just smaller entities.
Yes, I guess so. Yeah, it's still very early in the emergence of these technologies, right? And when we move away, IPFS is a storage protocol. Now, I can set up an IPFS, call it a node, on my computer, and you can set up an IPFS node on your computer, and it acts like one of these cloud storage devices, right? So, because I can store information that you have. If you advertise it to me, if you say, Dan, I'm going to the Sahara, will you look after this for me? But instead of you having to actively ask me, IPFS will share that content around the network. So it doesn't matter if it's my computer, somebody else who's running IPFS. Essentially, we then provide your cloud storage collective. It's not one single centralized entity, but it is a distributed network of individuals who are all running IPFS.
Yeah.
Now we all run this protocol inside our tech stack, and it means that we can then, if I like you, Stas, if I collect your art, I want to store and make sure that metadata that makes up that art is stored somewhere because it's in my interest because I own it. You're the creator, but I'm now the owner. In my interest to store that metadata so it's not lost forever. If you did store that metadata on something like iCloud or Google Drive or AWS, at any point your account could get shut down and that metadata wouldn't be available. And something like IPFS, because it's a protocol, it doesn't have that option. You can remove it from IPFS by just not storing that metadata anymore. So the files, in the same way you can just delete the files. So you're not storing that information anymore. But that doesn't mean that somebody else can.
Well, it's an old idea with the torrents, isn't it?
Right, magnet links, torrents.
Is that what it is? So it's basically we're all moving away from, we're just all going to be on a torrent type.
Well, it's better, right? I think it's better to have more computers linked to more computers and less single points of failure. So your iCloud account or your Google account is actually a single point of failure.
Yeah, that's right. No, that's right. Yeah.
So
exactly.
if you're storing things just in iCloud, and then you lose your password to your iCloud, or somebody compromises your account, that's a single point of failure.
Yeah.
Now, when we're using protocols like IPFS, which is not a blockchain, but it has a lot of blockchain properties. It's permissionless. It's a protocol. Anybody can run it. It runs on the same, and you ran it on your computer, it would execute in the same way. We can share the information by simply sharing this content identifier. It's called a CID, and that's, once you've stored it on IPFS and it's represented by this CID, I can then search that content using that identifying feature. So now we have peer-to-peer storage. So we're not going from the server-client model, where you're the client and the server is somebody else's computer. So you have an interface on your phone or on your laptop, and then you call somebody else's computer. They provide that information to you. When you're using IPFS, you're asking the network who's storing that CID. Can they provide it to you? And it's that distributed network that gives it its resiliency.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
a whole bunch of services have grown out of this. So you can use something called a pinning service, which takes that CID for your NFT metadata. And let's say you've got IPFS running on your computer. I also like your NFTs, so I store your metadata, and then 3 or 4 other people are also storing your metadata.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if my computer goes down, if it's off, my laptop's off, and I'm running IPFS on that, and somebody asks to look at your NFT, goes to like a NFT marketplace, they want to buy it. Well, where does that information, where's that served from, is the change here. So rather than it being like a centralized database, and any services that you have with Google or Amazon, you're now able to query protocol. So you can ask the protocol, who's storing this, and can I get it, please? And the protocol handles all of that exchange. That information
Right.
go discovery. You're able to store more metadata. You're able to forget metadata. So when I say this data storage is immutable, or it can't be undone, that's not quite entirely true, because we can just not store that content identifier. So that string, that identifying tag, can point you to somebody who's providing that information. But if nobody's storing it, then it's unavailable. And so when I say it's immutable and it can't be deleted, that's not entirely true. It will always remain identified by that number, but if nobody's storing that data associated with that CID, then it's gone.
Yeah. That's very technical then.
Sorry.
But that's okay. Thank you. I think that's good.
Okay. Sunny's on or sunny's off?
So we've just been discussing subjects as storage, ownership, distribution, getting paid, and showcasing digital work.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, we covered it. I got quite into some technical details.
Yeah.
So I think it's more, it is around the understanding. It's like, what does Web3 do for creators? More and more creators and artists are beginning to understand this is how you claim provenance for your work. So you sign something with a key, a private key that only you control, and that's then proof that it comes from you. You're able to do this using a pseudonym, so you can use this using a name that's not directly linked to your own identity. So you're able to create characters, personas, other entities outside of yourself So it gives you that veil in which to step out into the open world without being you. You can put the mask on and you can become a character, or you can play a character. We call it live action role playing. It's wonderful. And Web3 gives you that with this pseudonym, so the name that's not yours, and this ability to sign. What's emerged are peer-to-peer creative communities where people get together and share information, share knowledge, and then buy each other's artwork and get into various creative coordinated efforts. So they come together, and that's what Web3 does for creators.
So for storage, we're moving away from big corporations providing storage and servers.
Yeah. So again, we're at the very beginning of this. So the future of storage. Remember, cloud computing, cloud storage is just somebody else's computer. So there's a trust assumption there. You have to trust them. When you're dealing with the internet of ownership, if you're signing something and you're going to trade it and you're going to share it, that model doesn't really work. The Web2 has brought us some really amazing infrastructure like cloud storage for your phone and your photographs and all of your files, but it is just somebody else's computer. It's amazing infrastructure, but it does have some limitations. If something goes down, or if one of these big entities with centralized failure points goes down, then that's not available. Storage, distributed storage, is ultimately, it's decentralized, right? So it doesn't have a central point of failure or one central controlling entity. It's immutable, so it means it can't be changed once it's been created. And it's resilient because it doesn't have these single points of failure, and the protocol's open to anybody to run it. So it's very resilient infrastructure. We're at the beginning of this journey now for storage. And ultimately what it will mean is that your devices become curation devices. So you're like a collector, or your phone now becomes like your own gallery where you're serving up this information to other people. You're a creator and also you're a curator. And that's where this future of file storage and storage will come in the future. Everybody will become a curator of data, a curator of information, and that will become a new economic activity. So in the same way that you can host a gallery or an exhibition on the internet, where you can now store that gallery and store that information, hold that NFT and host it. This is very different to the server-client relationship. And once you put a creator in control of the distribution and the direct channel to the digital asset, you give them an enormous amount of power that they've never had before. And it's just the beginning. Decentralized storage is a huge paradigm shift that makes our data, our information more resilient, difficult to censor. So in Web 1, we had read, static web page, you can go visit it, get the information. And in Web 2, we had read and write. So you go to a website and you read the information. You can also then comment. And now in Web 3, we have read, write, and own. You can sign messages with a key that proves you control that digital asset. It's the future of provenance, and increasingly important as we move into an era of artificial intelligence. You're going to need to prove who you are. And this is one way to claim space and entity, like a namespace, and then sign information that comes from that namespace. So in the end, we've got artists and digital assets. They're able to get paid directly using peer-to-peer networks. Because it's an internet of money, the value is baked into the trade, so that we're not separating the internet or the digital asset from the money now. Those two things are now inherently linked. Because you have the ability to sign these assets, when you create a contract, so let's say for non-fungible tokens, so that has digital art, you want to create a one-of-one, that's now a scarce asset. But because it's nested inside a protocol, which is also money, so it's like the internet we had before, except imagine being able to send money as easily as you were able to browse the internet. There's no cards involved, there's no extra steps or anything like that. Your Web3 is the internet of money. It disintermediates. So you don't need a bank, you don't need a dealer, you don't need anybody else. You're using these protocols to do the settlement and also sign those digital assets. You can run your own marketplace, so you can have ownership over if you sell your digital assets. Web3 is the internet of money. It's the inherent value of the internet. We've created different tokenized infrastructure that when you bring your keys and your contracts, you now have the power to distribute your own digital assets.
You can get paid directly without using a service that will charge you fees?
That's true. Although there are fees, there is always a fee.
What's that?
If you're not if you don't pay a fee, you are the fee. But because we abstract these things out now to protocol, you'll pay something called gas, like a network fee. I don't get it. You don't get it. Somebody else is performing that role for the network. But what it does is it handles that transaction between us so that there's a small fee that when you buy art from me, you'll pay a small fee in gas to make the transaction happen. But that doesn't go to you or me. It goes to part of the protocol where somebody's serving that need. So somebody will provide a service. Because when you get into the details, because when some things are sort of like, they're true on one level of resolution, but then they're not true on another level of resolution. So when you say things like, yeah, it's immutable storage, but it still needs to be stored somewhere, just because it can't be, that identifier can never be repeated again, doesn't mean that it can't be lost. So you can still lose this data, you can still lose this information. Yeah, somebody is running the server, but it's what protocol they're running on that server, whether that's controlled by a centralized body like a company, or whether you're just running that protocol and anybody can run that protocol. But we are just connecting to other people's computers. You're using their storage, you're asking them to make computations, you might ask them to sign that they've done certain jobs for you.
But what about terabytes of data? We will have more and more.
Yeah, so this is where sort of the pressure comes for curation. I don't remember if you remember you had one of the first iPhones. Before they had cloud storage, you were taking photos from your phone and you quickly reach the storage limit. But then you go into this curation. So like, which photos am I going to keep? The same thing's going to happen again, except with our own data. So with blockchain, storage becomes a curation game. So you're now collecting and storing data that you think is, you like, that creates value for you, or you're collecting it from other artists, or you're storing family photos, or whatever it is you want to keep safe. Your own personal storage devices will play a bit bigger role. That's it. So I used to work with radios when I was in the military. I worked with all kinds of radios, all kinds of communication equipment. And there was this thing they introduced us to, was the encryption of those messages that we would send over the wires, over different frequencies. And because I was doing this work where we'd be out of contact for quite a long time, they used to give us the crypto. So I learned all about what it contained, how it worked, how you bounce then an encrypted message off the ionosphere, and all kinds of mad techniques. And what the security vulnerability was. So like, as soon as you broadcast a message, even though it was encrypted, somebody would know that there was a message that came out of like a certain area, and you'd have to move. Anyway, so that InfoSec, like information security, came from that. And then when I discovered crypto, like late 2017, mid 2017, 2018, and I started looking at Bitcoin and looking at how these ledgers worked, and how the same vulnerabilities were true there as they were on the battlefield, or the same vulnerabilities were staying, people would know who you were communicating with, or somebody would be able to get that message, and how much that would leak. I thought it was almost part of the same problem. Except now, rather than it being like governments against governments, it's every individual against every authoritarian government around the world. It's like at any point in the future, if they don't like something you're up to, you could be penalised. So I think that's really, really important area to work in, try and protect people.